we frequently come across the matter of dementia in relation to elderly people. But dementia frequently can also be associated with comparatively young people. You can get early dementia. Dementia in any sort of form is concerned with the shrinking of the contents of the brain, and particularly the surfaces of the brain. The surfaces of our brains are thrown into folds. We'll deal with this under the anatomy of the brain later. But our brains are thrown into folds. And in ancient days, these folds of the brain were seen as snakes. They were regarded as coiled snakes. And the folds which they are thrown into contain on the surfaces the nerve cells which are responsible for consciousness, the nerve cells which are responsible for our higher faculties like memory, the factors also of things like character. All these are contained, these are embedded in the activity of cells on the surfaces of the brain or in these coils. We call them sulci and gyri, the surface of the brain thrown into the characteristic folds that I am drawing here now are really valleys and mountains in the surface of the brain. And we call the mountainous parts the gyri, or the coils of the snake, and the sulci are the valleys, the grooves between the gyri. The purpose of the brain being thrown into folds at all is to give it more surface area, We'll come to that some other time. Now, in the condition of dementia, these sulci and gyri, the tissues of the surface of the brain, become flattened. For some unaccountable reason, they become flattened and widened. And so the area of the brain which is devoted to mental activity is greatly lessened. Also, the hollows inside the brain, the ventricles that we call them, become expanded. And we talk about softening of the brain. And the rate of destruction of brain cells has greatly increased. The neurons, the live cells which are responsible for our consciousness and our mental activities, these cells become greatly reduced in number, far, far more rapidly than in the normal person, so that other cells, brain cells, grow into them that are not responsible for nervous activity. Now, we can delineate certain types of dementia. You're bound to come across these, if not in yourself, in some of your patients sooner or later. And so we talk about a primary dementia, which has no cause, a primary dementia. And this primary dementia just happens. There is no scientific or medical explanation for it. But we say that there is an esoteric cause for it. The person, we'll talk about the symptoms of it later on. We're always interested in symptoms. The symptoms of dementia we'll discuss later, but we're concerned with the causes of it now. Now, dementia can occur at an early age. You expect it after the age of 70 to some extent, but at an earlier age it occurs as the result of the soul wishing to withdraw from its particular set of vehicles. So there is the soul wanting to withdraw, snapping the supply of inward energies to the surfaces of the brain. And why should the soul want to withdraw? Firstly, it would want to withdraw if the soul's purpose had been achieved in that life. Now, these are important matters. They're not just curiosities. I don't sit here and struggle with this very difficult subject just to give you curiosities to toy with. You're meant to use this information and to employ it effectively in your esoteric treatment. And so in examining the case history of the person suffering from dementia, this is what you watch out for. How has the soul been able to manage with that incarnation? Has the person been expressive? Why is the soul withdrawing? Is it because the soul has expressed itself beautifully, well, as truth, beauty, or goodness in some way? Or is the soul withdrawing because it can't and knows it never will in that particular set of bodies, in that particular personality? So this is the underlying causative factor here. Causative factor. There are others, but this is the esoteric factor involved. Now, the way in which the soul withdraws is from inwards outwardly. From inwards outwardly. The first effects are spiritual. There is the loss of the creative urge, the loss of the will to be, the loss of refinement that make a person a spiritual human being as distinct from an animal. So that's the first way in which the soul withdraws. It begins to withdraw at the deepest level. Then it will show mentally as not wanting to become involved in any mental activity. Then it withdraws emotionally. Then it withdraws etherically, and finally you get etherically the pre-physical destruction of the etheric matrix of the brain, the destruction of the etheric matrix of the brain, and then the actual rapid disintegration of the nerve tissue of the brain, which is the final end result of the soul's wanting to withdraw. Now we know that consciousness is threaded, is at the end of a thread that links us to the soul. There are two cords which form the sutratma that links the soul with its lower triad. And the one thread is called the consciousness thread. And it's anchored in the third ventricle of the brain. We'll do the brain anatomy eventually. And the second thread is the life thread. And the life thread is anchored in the sinus node. The life thread is anchored in the sinus node, and through the sinus node to all cells of the body, through the medium of solar fire. And when the life thread is snapped, the sinus node begins to falter, and eventually the heart secretes a material, as Alice Bailey describes it, which destroys other links, like consciousness, to the aura, and then death supervenes. We will also consider the technique of dying later, how dying occurs, how it can be hastened, how it can be resisted, why it should be resisted, and so on. So here we have the two threads, the consciousness thread anchored in the brain region of the third ventricle, and the life thread anchored in the sinus nodes. Sometimes the consciousness thread breaks first at death, and the life thread remains. On other occasions, the life thread breaks and the person appears to be dead, but he is still conscious through the consciousness thread. They don't always break simultaneously. And so in dementia, the consciousness thread becomes greatly reduced. The consciousness thread becomes greatly reduced. Its ability to channel energy is greatly reduced, and this shows itself in the various aspects of dementia. And so we get as a pathology diffuse atrophy of the brain tissue. Diffuse, widespread atrophy, dying, not being active, of nerve cells in the brain. That's what dementia means. All right? Many conditions seem to bring this on prematurely. Individuals who are crystallized in outlook tend to be, obviously so, those whom the soul cannot manage. A crystallized person. So we talk about individuals with fifth rays in their complement. A fifth ray brain, or a fifth ray mind, or a fifth ray personality, or any combination of two of these, very frequently produces this sort of dementia. Now, we say in esoteric teachings that the normal process of dementia, which is not dependent on the soul withdrawal, but is breakdown at an etheric and physical level, that this can be warded off. That while the soul still wishes to express something, you can help. And we talk about the disciplines of meditation, the arousal of the ultra major chakra, which fans the whole of the brain tissue with a constant stream of prana. And so we teach that it is possible, providing the soul still has something to express, it is possible to maintain creativeness right into old age. Creativeness, after all, is only habit. Creativeness is only habit. And young people need to learn this, that creativeness is habit. It can be fostered and it can be maintained, and with the greatest ease through making it a habit. And all the creative energies of the body should be directed towards this purpose, not frittered away or wasted, providing the soul has something still to say. Now that's what we call primary dementia. No known cause for it, only an esoteric one. Then we have secondary dementia. And this is where there is damage or injury to the brain. Damage or injury to the brain. And the soul can no longer express itself because the brain has been damaged. And then the soul would withdraw because of damage outwardly in the brain tissue. It can be also caused, secondly, by poisoning. Poisoning, especially through things like alcohol. Alcoholic imbibition can cause secondary dementia, softening of the brain tissues, destruction of the brain tissues. I've pointed out that alcohol is a poison. There is not a single tissue in the body that is not poisoned by it. That does not mean to say that you must stop eating meat, that you must stop drinking alcohol, that you must stop smoking, that you must stop everything. Like the young man who cried out to the master, "Master, I have given up alcohol, I have given up sex, I have given up meat, I have given up all my pleasures. Will I now live to be 100? The master answered, "No, but you'll feel like it." And so the second factor is toxins like alcohol, which can produce secondary dementia. Lead poisoning, especially dangerous in children. Sucking toys with lead paint in them. Aluminium. But don't go crazy about getting rid of all your aluminium pots. This was a fad that went around not so long ago. Oh, don't have aluminium pots because they cause heart disease and goodness knows what. I investigated that very carefully from an occult point of view. And unless the person is actually sensitized to aluminium, and that is possible, then aluminium pots are not a particular dangerous thing. But aluminium paint and so on, yes. We all become sensitized as we grow older. I can't wear nickel on a watch in hot weather. It just is something that has developed after 45 or 50 years of wearing nickel and reacting to it as one normally does, and then suddenly becoming sensitized to it. And many of us, when we tread the path, become sensitized to many things. And alcohol is one of them. And you just cannot drink alcohol in volume once you begin to tread the path. It is just not possible. And so this is the sort of thing that you should note down. There's nothing wrong with a glass of wine or a couple of glasses of cider occasionally with dinner. That's not what we're talking about. We're meaning that the ability to drink half a dozen whiskies and sodas in the ordinary course of daily life is not possible once you begin to tread the path. The third factor that can cause secondary dementia is a cutting down of oxygen supply to the brain. We call this anoxia. Anoxia. It can happen through carbon monoxide poisoning. Somebody leaves a coal fire on in a bedroom and goes to sleep with the windows shut and inhales carbon monoxide until he becomes red-faced, and the blood is accepting the carbon monoxide and not accepting oxygen. And this can destroy the brain tissue, softening of the brain. It can also be caused, under this third section, post-operatively. Post-operative conditions. I won't go into that, it's no concern of ours. Poor breathing, where the person doesn't know what intercostal diaphragmatic breathing is. If you ask the average English boy to inhale, you say to the average English boy, take in a deep breath, he'll go, lifting his shoulders up, and he thinks he's breathing. He's doing nothing of the sort. Intercostal means breathing with the ribs, diaphragmatic breathing. And the diaphragm is responsible for 60% of the air you breathe in. So we need to go into the subject of intercostal diaphragmatic breathing. And I don't know any yogis who know much about intercostal diaphragmatic breathing. I've seen some very weird contortions called asanas and postures in hatha yoga, which really don't take into account the full breathing mechanism. Now, any sort of chest disorder which inhibits the uptake of oxygen, like we did a little while ago, emphysema. These conditions can mean poor oxygen supply to the brain cortex and softening of the brain tissue. Then there are things like infections can produce them. This is secondary dementia, where the cause is known or can be traced to. Infections, especially things like syphilis, where there is general paralysis setting in. Syphilis has several stages. It's a disease that is derived from old Lemuria. All of us have had in previous lives, especially in our Lemurian lives, experiences of the syphilis group of diseases. The disease was linked to the sacral center, the sacral chakra. And in Lemuria there were abuses of the sacral center. Once the two sexes separated into male and female, there was a lot of lack of control in heterosexual relationships. And so there was over-arousal of the sacral center and a weakening of the body in the Lemurian age. And it was then that the spirochete of syphilis began to attack the human body. And many diseases are still grouped esoterically, especially by Alice Bailey, under the title of a major disease, and that major disease is syphilis. There are three major diseases. The syphilitic group of diseases, which includes leprosy and elephantiasis. There is the cancerous group of diseases, another major group. And the third one is the tuberculous group of diseases. And Alice Bailey tends to divide all diseases into these three groups. And these three groups reflect disorders of three chakras. The sacral center for the Lemurian disease of syphilis, the solar plexus chakra for the cancer group of diseases, and the throat chakra for the tuberculous group of diseases. And many of the mental disorders that are emerging today are related to the Ajna center, the brow chakra, the new diseases of discipleship, we call them, diseases of discipleship, in which there is a focusing of energy in the brow region. We were talking about causes of secondary dementia, where you can actually put your finger on an outer world cause of it. We're talking about infections like syphilis, the syphilitic group of diseases, and so on. Then a fifth cause of it is metabolic upsets. By that we mean, of course, a diet that is deficient in substances like vitamin B, which produces beriberi, and where you get A vitamins, avitaminosis, as in, for instance, alcoholism, where the person just doesn't bother to eat. And this can cause the actual softening of the brain. And then lastly, under this group of outer causes, you get the conditions of cancer, cancer of the brain, or spread of cancer from another area, cancer in the spine, which has pieces broken off it and which move by metastases to the brain area, seeding of the brain with pieces of cancer cells. All that can cause softening of the brain tissue and secondary dementia. Now, what about the signs and symptoms of dementia? These are what I want you to pay particular attention to. And between now and when I next see you, next week, I'd like you to examine your charts. By that I mean the Bach charts. Have we got some here, Joe? Can you hand them out and they can have a look at them while we're doing this. So first of all, let's consider the effects of softening of the brain. How do you recognize it in an individual? How do you recognize it? Do understand that it can happen to almost anybody. We had a youngster in the ashram not so long ago whose mother began to develop dementia at the age of 30. 30, 35, 40, and it was all over by the time she was 45. So don't think that it is just a disease of old age. The most important feature about dementia shows up in intelligence, And so you look for, first of all, failure of memory. The memory lets them down. They can't remember, and more important than anything, they can't retain memory of recent events. Events going back in their childhood, yes, they can remember that, but recent events goes very quickly. They can't, for instance, remember the last meal that they've had sometimes. I remember an aunt of mine who had this condition, and she said, "Do you know, Douglas, I haven't eaten all day." And she just sat down with myself and my other aunt and had a whacking great breakfast. And this was only 12 o'clock. I haven't eaten all day. They can't remember things like that. They don't remember who has died in the family, and they misjudge others in the family who come to talk to them. They get things mixed up. Then there is what we call confabulation, in which when they have got a gap in memory, they fill it in with statements. They don't remember, but they just keep talking and fill in the gaps with anything. That's called confabulation. They tend to live in the past because that's the only place they can live. The part of the brain that should have retained recent memory is gone, softened. So they can only remember the memories that are laid down in the deepest parts of the brain, the earliest memories, and so they live in the past. Now, I'm going to ask Joe to give me the flower remedy for a person who lives in the past in a few minutes. Yes, honeysuckle. Is that connected also with nostalgia? All right, so there, make a note of it. Put it down. Here's one of your remedies, one of your flower remedies for the treatment of dementia. Always give them honeysuckle. Honeysuckle for memories of the past or focus of interest in past events. They don't want recent news. Recent news doesn't interest them. It's extraordinary, but it's true. They're not interested in listening to the news on the television. You'd think that a bored old person or a bored person living on his own or something would want to listen to the... No, they're not interested. They're only interested in long past events. They've got no interest in new ideas and new things. They can't grasp them, can't grasp new things at all. Only interested in the past. They resent them. And so resentment is strong here, and there are two remedies for resentment. I think the one here is willow. Is that right, Joe? Willow is one of the flower remedies for resentment. They resent everything going on around them. This particular aunt, I remember, I would take her for a drive and drive her around the town and the countryside, and she'd look out the window. She'd, "Oh, they're putting everything down. Everything. Isn't it awful?" That's the sort of thing that they build up resentment for everything. I remember taking her into town and showing her that big office block at Charing Cross Road, or where is it? The one that goes up and up with all the... Yes, that one. And I remember we were standing at the bottom, and I said, "Have a look at this building there." And she, "Ooh, ooh, ooh, ooh." She gradually saw right up to the top, and she said, "Isn't it disgusting?" So that sort of attitude, complete resentment for anything that has suddenly been thrust upon them. Also, there is no desire anymore for truth, beauty, and goodness. No desire. This is a frequent, not always, but this will tend to indicate that the soul has begun to withdraw. No interest in beauty, truth, and goodness. All they wish to do is to be preoccupied with gassing about the family, early history, looking at old photograph albums, poring over the past. How does this show? What sort of signs do they present with? Remember what a sign is. A sign is what you see in the patient. There's confusion. They're confused. They're not quite sure what day it is. They're not quite sure just where they are. Sometimes they get so confused that they feel lost in their own homes. They're what we call disorientated in time and space. So one of the ways in which you test them out for this condition is to ask them, what day is it there? What's the date? And who's president? Who's the present king? And say, oh, well, she's a nice person, I know that. And finally they come out with who it is that is the reigning monarch. You have to be subtle about it. They can't help it. They become dirty. They don't care about themselves any longer. They tend to ignore the state of the clothes that they're wearing and sleep in their clothes and so on. They become dirty. They're slothful. Can't be bothered to bend down and pick anything up anymore. And it grows on them. They let their standards drop. Get up later and later in the morning and slothful, slow at everything. If I tried to prod my aunt along, who had dementia, and I'd say, well, now what about getting washed there and give your teeth a clean? Oh, sod it. And then there's bewilderment, as you can expect, bewilderment. They can't grasp things. Then you should write this quotation down which describes dementia. It is the remorseless enemy of human dignity. It is the remorseless enemy of human dignity. And that's the terrible thing about it. You can get these lovely people who have been the doyens of society, and they slowly but surely regress, they break down, and the thing which is so horrible about it is that there is this loss of dignity. And so we say that this is primarily a death instinct. It's the soul trying to withdraw. Now, once you can be assured that the soul is not wanting to withdraw, we would have to leave that matter to another lecture. Once you feel that there is something here that needs fighting, after all, if a person has had encephalitis or meningitis or something like that, and they're comparatively young, you want them to fight back. You want them to try and establish themselves once more in the world. And when you do, then they need some sort of a treatment. And this is the sort of treatment that you should think of. Treatment. Establish rapport with them. Try and establish a rapport with them. They need individuals to understand their peculiar position and not to harbor moral things against them. Oh, you're such a dirty old bitch, and that sort of thing. You don't want that. You want the person who understands. Come on down here. Come on. Let me run your bath for you. There you are. We'll have a nice hot bath, and you'll feel ever so much better afterwards. Then we can talk about Aunt Jane or whatever it is. You've got to go along with them, establish a rapport with them. And if it is a person who's a stranger to you, then you should see their relatives and help to explain to them what the position is, so that the relatives can do that sort of thing for them, with them. Some say that you should saturate them with vitamin B, all the vitamins under the B group. We certainly say that if possible you should get them into breathing exercises, even if you have to reward them. It's not a condition that is reversible. It's not reversible. You can't reverse the condition. It is only when you're dealing with an esoteric person who is into meditation or who is prepared to meditate that you can get some sort of reversal. But under ordinary conditions, orthodox treatment, there's no reversal. But breathing exercises do help. Breathing exercises do help. Neurons that are tottering between life and death are maintained by good oxygenation. I'll talk about that in a moment. The use of the violet bath is helpful. The violet bath I've described before. Sit the patient near a window in which the sunlight is streaming through. Let them sit back to front on a chair so that they can put their arms over the top of the chair and have their backs, which are naked, exposed to the sunlight. But in front of them, place a violet drape. Hang a violet drape, a real violet-colored drape, and let the sun shine on the drape and throw the violet back to them. Let the sun shine on their backs and onto the violet drape and throw the violet back to them. It's what we call the violet bath, and it's very useful. Breathing exercises, anything that can oxygenate the brain. And the best method of doing this is what I call the holistic breath. And perhaps we need to look at this for a moment. Now, most people breathe inefficiently. Most people breathe inefficiently. Whilst you're sitting here, this moment, you're breathing a half a pint of air. The lungs can take in 11 pints of air. So only 1/22nd or 1/20th of your capacity is being used. What is needed is to breathe more efficiently. And you yourselves, even if you're tired or mentally exhausted, can find this particular exercise useful. We can't use the 11 pints of air usually because there's a lot of dead space in the lungs. A lot of dead space in which air lies and doesn't circulate, doesn't come out. So we need a breath that can help exchange this dead space air. And so, let us consider a breath for this purpose. The secret of the breath is to breathe everything out that you can. And so you exhale. Take a deep breath and exhale. And I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you the extent to which it can be done. It's not a very pretty sight, but it's a useful breath. Now, that breath is a full breath. It's what I call a holistic breath. You have forced the air out of the lungs by bending the body forward and hanging the shoulders, sagging the shoulders. You help to squeeze all the air out as much as you can. And you take that very deep breath, and when you have got the breath in, you can pound the ribs, if you like that. Pound the ribs. The effect of this is to shake out the air in the dead spaces so that it will circulate, it will diffuse with what air you've taken in. Now, the important thing is eventually to get to the stage where you can hold the breath for about 22 seconds. In 22 seconds, every red blood cell in the body will go through the lungs. Even a red cell which is on the way to the tip of your toes will have time to pass through the lungs, which have got this huge breath there. You're laden with air, and you're compressing it, you're pounding it, and all the blood in the body goes through the lungs in 22 seconds. And so it means that there would be maximum oxygenation for every cell in the body. You can try this yourselves at home, and you'll find that you'll immediately brighten up. That if you have been mentally in a bit of a torpor, that you begin to feel alert straight away. It's a very, very useful exercise. One or two of those, and of course you would have to help the patient. We'd have to help the patient to do this breathing. But it is very, very beneficial. There is another esoteric method of helping such people, and it is to take them to the scenes of their childhood, if possible. They're always talking about, oh, I was brought up in Gravesend, and we used to go and cross on the Tilbury Ferry, and so take them there. Take them for a drive. Get their family to do it, if you like. And let them walk over, go over, live in their minds, as it were, some of the regions of their youth. This can have a very, very salutary effect on people who are lacking wholeness, who are insecure because part of the brain tissue has gone. It restores their roots to them, if you like, and roots provide nourishment. So that is one way in which you can help. I believe, for instance, that Queen Victoria lived to such a vast age as she did, partly because she was so fascinated by photographs. She had the world's best collection of photographs. And she had every person in her family and every scene in her life photographed. She used to pore over these photographs, going back all the time and remembering the particular scene depicted in the photograph, reliving it. But I always recommend this as one of the methods of living into vast old age, if that's what you want to do. And by that I mean living, not half living into old age. A review of early events assisted by photographs and by visits to the places. Very, very helpful. Then, of course, there is magnetic treatment. Magnetic treatment, and we will show you eventually how the head can be placed in a solenoid into a magnetic field with pulsating electromagnetic forces, and how this can assist in the freer flow of energies from within. This is always supposing that the soul still wishes to express some purpose. If the treatment, the magnetic treatment, is not successful, that is an indication of a poor prognosis. Poor prognosis. Prognosis means what's going to happen to the disease. A good prognosis means that it'll clear up. A bad prognosis means that it will not clear up, that it's going to get worse. And so if the person responds to magnetic treatment after 4 or 5 weeks of twice a week magnetic treatment, then this would be an indication prognosis is good. The soul does not want to withdraw. It still has something to give. How else would you go about the soul's purpose? You would present the patient in your own spiritual diary, and you would get answers. Now, I can't tell you how important, again, it is, once more, to keep a spiritual diary. I've had to hound people in my own ashram to keep spiritual diaries, and they're only now beginning to see the reward of being able to put questions to the higher self through the diary, and they're getting answers themselves. They need me, you do it. You should have a page, one page or a series of pages for your particular patient, recording the signs, the symptoms, the progress of the patient, what treatment you're giving, and any questions that you have, like this one. Does the soul of this patient want to hold on, or is the soul withdrawing? You will get answers. energy from the unconscious will come to the patient if you give them the magnetic treatment. Certainly, if you can teach them to meditate, that's rather unlikely, but if you can teach them to meditate, this would help as well. Now, sometime I will do memory disorders, but I just want to finish off what I have to say today in the next 20 minutes. I want to give you the flower remedies for delinquency, delinquent children. And if you will remember earlier, I did give the various signs and symptoms of delinquency, and I will give them again just to help those who are new to the class. They're very simple, and I have done some research in this, and I want to pass them on to you. You've got your charts in front of you. So I'm really going to call this the psychopathic personality, especially with regard to the young adult. Now, I list here something like 18 symptoms, signs and symptoms, and what I want to do is to remind you that about 4 or 5 of these at least would always be relevant. You have to find which of them are relevant. Find out from the delinquent child, the boy or the girl, whoever it is, which of these symptoms apply, and then I will give you the flower remedy for them now. First of all, they very frequently have a superficial attractiveness. You know the child's a delinquent, or the young adult is a delinquent. They have a superficial attractiveness. They have a fresh nature, vitality, conversation, and so on. Where there is this, you give chicory, and especially if there is mental and physical congestion. If they are very, very talkative and their mind flies from one thing to another, indication of not of a quick mind, but of a congested mind that's trying to spit it all out. Chicory. Where the person is highly strung and gives the impression of being vivacious or highly attentive and so on, or even hyperactive, then give vervain. So there are your 2 remedies for the superficial attractiveness. Where there is the practice of cunning, and where there is suspicion, a deeply suspicious delinquent, give cherry plum. Give cherry plum. Cunning means that they use people. They use people and they manipulate people, or think they do. Cherry plum. Give holly for suspicion. Holly for suspicion. Thirdly, this is the 3rd symptom, a faculty for talking. They talk fast in order to deceive. The faculty for talking fast in order to deceive. Give willow for those who are always arguing and chattering. Willow. The faculty for talking, willow. Fourthly, for unreliability and irresponsibility, give mustard for unreliability. A nothing matters attitude. Mustard. Nothing, who cares? Couldn't care less. Irresponsibility, especially where they are easily influenced. Their irresponsibility arises through being easily influenced. Or where they are the victim of circumstances, give centaury. Centaury. C-E-N-T-A-U-R-Y. Fifthly, where there is disregard for truth and honesty. Disregard for truth and honesty. Then you give beech, where they are fault-finding, In other words, they're looking for faults that aren't really there. Beach for fault finding, but also where they're against the establishment. It's a form of lying. They live by the establishment, but they're against it. Beach. Sixthly, where the delinquent will not accept blame. He will not accept blame. You can't get them to accept the fact that they have committed something wrong. Give wild oats, because he resents accepting the blame. Resents accepting the blame. Wild oat. Where there is poor judgment, seventhly, for their concerning their own welfare. Walnut. Walnut. Influences by others. Walnut is an Aries flower remedy, and Aries rules attitudes and influences. Eighthly, where they don't learn by experience, they go on making the same old mistakes again and again and again. Chestnut bud. Don't learn from experience. Ninthly, where there's poverty of affect, they can't feel deeply. Poverty of affect. They've done something wrong, they've hurt somebody, and they can't feel for the person. This is typical of the person who commits a burglary. They can't put themselves in the place of the person who has been robbed. Poverty of affect, shallow emotions. Clematis for indifference, that's one of them, clematis for indifference. And wild rose for apathy and boredom. They're bored by people's worries. Clematis and wild rose for poverty of affect. Tenthly, they can't see themselves as others see them. They can't see themselves as others see them. Water violet, lack of empathy, water violet. 11thly, for the delinquent or the psychopathic personality that is completely egocentric, I, always egocentric. Heather for self-centeredness. Heather for self-centeredness and self-concern. It's an I-ness, an ego trip that leads to crime. That's Pisces. Heather is a Pisces flower. Crime, Pluto. 12thly, the psychopath that has mood swings. Mood swings. One moment he's up in the air and the next moment he's down below. One moment he loves you, the next moment he hates you. Mood swings. Scleranthus. Scleranthus. That's for mood swings. But now listen. When he is in mania or he's manic, give him vervain. When he is depressed, give him mustard. So there are three here. Mood swings, up, down, that's scleranthus. When he's up, you give him scleranthus and vervain. And when he is down, give him scleranthus and mustard. So it's scleranthus and vervain while he's up, and scleranthus and mustard while he's down. There's a couple more here. Oh, no, we'll go on. 13. When he shows no response to special kindness which you have shown him. They don't respond to kindness or consideration that you're constantly showering on him. They're intractable to it. Rock water for inflexibility. Rock water for inflexibility. Helps to wear them down, slowly but surely. rock water. Where they're intractable because of pride or rigidity, give them beach. 14. When they manifest shocking or fantastic behavior, when they manifest shocking or fantastic behavior, do it deliberately in public. Or they shoot out the street lights with a pellet gun. Shocking and fantastic behavior, give them Scleranthus for mood swings, and Vine for megalomania, and Crabapple to return them to a sense of proportion. We're working on a casebook of 20 patients for this, and most of these will be given as part of a patient's history. 15. Where there are infrequent suicide attempts, where suicide is threatened or attempted. Again, Scleranthus for mood swings. Note the number of times Scleranthus comes up, so that we can virtually say if it's delinquency, it's Scleranthus. It's a basic one for delinquency. Scleranthus for mood swings again, and cherry plum for violent impulses, and vervain for overenthusiasm. So where you've got suicide attempts, Scleranthus, cherry plum, and vervain. 16. Where they create bizarre scenes with no purpose to them. Create bizarre scenes with no purpose to them. Do it on a railway train when they're traveling. Create bizarre scenes. Stick their luggage half out the window. That sort of thing. Willow restores a sense of proportion. And of course crabapple does, but willow is better here. Holly for hatred, anger, and aggressiveness. Holly for hatred, anger, and aggressiveness. Because they're doing this out of a sense of anger. They hate society and they create bizarre situations where they lampoon society, make fun of society. Holly. Where they are sexually precocious, meaning that at an early age they are showing all the sexual interests of somebody 10 years older. Walnut, which rids them of unwanted habits. And chestnut bud for repeating mistakes. Walnut and chestnut bud for sexual precociousness. Where they lack perseverance, they can't persevere with a job, they can't persevere with a task, or persevere playing with a toy, they can't persist. Give them larch for weak convictions, and larch for procrastination. They won't persist with something, they put off doing it. Larch. Now, summing them up, these are the ones that emerge as the most common. Scleranthus and cherry plum. And if they are psychotic, you give them elm. If they are psychotic, by that I mean that they are seeing things that are unreal, talking about things that are unreal, acting unreally, where they are psychotic, give them elm. So Scleranthus, cherry plum, and elm if they're psychotic. Then there is a general thing that you can do with them. Give them the flower remedy of their birth sign. Give them the flower remedy of their birth sign, which is easy to locate on the chart. Find out where their sun is or what they're born in, and give them the the flower remedy for that. Give them their rising sign flower remedy, which will give them, in any case, an element of persistence for good. Always remember that the rising sign is the home of the soul, the sign found on the horizon, the first house. It indicates persistence of the soul, and it also is indicated, you give the flower remedy for that sign, where there is lack of truth, lack of beauty, lack of goodness. And lastly, if you have done a horoscope of the individual, find out which sign of the zodiac is most afflicted and give them the flower remedy for that.